The quiet path. The morning air, still cool from the night, carried the scent of damp earth and the subtle perfume of honeysuckle from the trellis beside the porch. Sarah knelt in her small garden, her hands moving with practiced grace through the rows of young snap beans. The sun, a pale gold disk above the eastern woods, began to warm her back through the thin fabric of her plain blue dress. Each weed pulled, each loosened clump of soil, was a small act of devotion, a quiet rhythm that mirrored the steady pulse of her life. Here, amidst the burgeoning life of the garden, she found a profound sense of purpose. The world beyond their valley, a place whispered about in hushed tones, felt impossibly distant, a hazy dream from another existence. Her world was here, in the rich soil, the familiar creak of the barn door, the comforting presence of her family. A bumblebee, heavy and slow, buzzed past her ear, intent on the vibrant purple heads of clover pushing up near the fence line. Sarah watched it, a faint smile touching her lips. There was an honesty to the garden, a straightforward exchange of effort for sustenance that she deeply appreciated. It demanded patience, foresight, and a willingness to work, much like the tenets of their faith. She often thought of this as she tended her plants, connecting the simple act of cultivation to the deeper cultivation of her spirit. As the sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows across the yard, Sarah gathered her tools, dusting the soil from her hands. Inside, the scent of fresh-baked bread mingled with the faint, sweet aroma of beeswax polish. Her mother, Rebecca, was already at the kitchen table, preparing vegetables for the midday meal. Sarah greeted her with a soft mutter and moved to the pump to wash her hands, the cool water a pleasant shock against her skin. The afternoon passed in a similar gentle rhythm, chores flowing seamlessly into one another. After the midday meal, Sarah retreated to the quiet sanctuary of the parlor, a room rarely used except for special occasions or, as today, for the delicate work of quilting. Rebecca joined her, settling into a rocking chair near the window, her needle already flashing in the sunlight. The quilt frame, a sturdy wooden rectangle, held a half-finished block of deep forest greens and muted blues. It was a pattern called pine burr, intricate and demanding, yet Sarah found immense satisfaction in the precise alignment of each tiny diamond of fabric. "The border will be a solid cream," Rebecca murmured, her eyes fixed on her own stitches, "to soften the strength of the green." Sarah nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration as she meticulously pressed a seam with her thumbnail. "I think it will be beautiful, Mutter. For Cousin Esther's wedding, yes?" Rebecca hummed in agreement. "She always admired the quilts from your Grossmutter. This pattern is similar to one she made for my own dowry chest." The soft murmur of their voices, the rhythmic snip-snip of the shears, and the whisper of fabric against fabric filled the room. This was an ancient language, spoken through generations of women, a quiet testament to their skill and their enduring connections. Sarah loved the tactile nature of quilting, the way disparate pieces of cloth could be transformed into something whole and beautiful, imbued with the love and care of its maker. Each stitch was a tiny commitment, a promise of warmth and comfort. Later, as the evening shadows stretched long across the fields and the family gathered for supper, a different kind of quiet settled over the household. Levi, Sarah's father, cleared his throat, a sound that always signaled a shift in the evening's easy flow. Sarah glanced at her mother, whose gaze was fixed on her plate, though her hands lay still in her lap. A prickle of apprehension, light as a feather, touched Sarah's heart. "Sarah," Levi began, his voice deeper than usual, yet still gentle. He looked across the table at her, his kind blue eyes steady. "Your Mutter and I have been in prayer, and we have spoken with Jacob's parents." Sarah's breath hitched, almost imperceptibly. She knew, deep down, what was coming. It was the way of things, the natural progression of life within their community. Still, the words, when they arrived, felt like a soft blow to her chest. "They are good people, and Jacob is a strong, God-fearing young man," Rebecca added, her voice a little softer than usual. He will be a good provider. Levi nodded. We believe it is God's will, Sarah, that you and Jacob join in marriage. A profound silence descended, broken only by the chirping of crickets outside the open window. Sarah clasped her hands in her lap, her fingers intertwining tightly. She looked from her father's earnest face to her mother's gentle, expectant expression. There was no anger, no coercion in their eyes, only a deep-seated belief in the path they had chosen for her, the path that had been chosen for them and for their parents before them. Jacob. She pictured him, tall, broad-shouldered, with a quiet demeanor and a steady gaze. He was a good man, reliable and hard-working, known for his skill with horses. They had exchanged few words over the years, mostly pleasantries at community gatherings. He was, in every outward aspect, a suitable match. A kaleidoscope of emotions swirled within her, a quiet sense of inevitability, a flutter of nervousness, and a strange, almost detached curiosity about this new chapter. Her own desires, vague and undefined as they were, had never truly entered the equation. Her duty, her obedience, were paramount. It was the bedrock of their faith, the foundation of their community. I understand, Sarah said, her voice a little breathy but clear. She met her father's gaze, then her mother's. I will do what is asked of me. A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through her parents. Rebecca reached across the table, her hand resting briefly on Sarah's. God bless you, my daughter, she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Levi smiled, a warmth returning to his eyes. We know you will make a good wife, Sarah, a steadfast companion. The rest of the meal passed in a haze, the simple food suddenly tasting bland. Sarah found herself tracing the pattern on the tablecloth, her mind already beginning to navigate the uncharted waters of her future. Jacob, her husband. The words felt foreign on her tongue, heavy with unspoken expectations and the weight of tradition. She would be a wife, then a mother. Her life, already so clearly defined by the quiet path she walked, had just taken its most significant turn yet, and she, obedient and thoughtful, would follow it. A future laid out. The quiet afternoon hummed with the rustle of new muslin, a sound soon to yield to the swish of her wedding gown. Sarah, needle dancing between her fingers, sat beside her mother, the fine fabric pooling in her lap. Each stitch was a tiny pledge, a deliberate stride towards a future meticulously charted, not by her own hand, but for her. Her mother's steadfast presence offered solace, a silent compass in unfamiliar waters. The sleeve should be just so, Rebecca murmured, adjusting a delicate lace cuff. Sarah nodded, her gaze drifting to the window. Beyond the panes, the familiar garden bloomed in late summer's riotous hues, a vibrant tapestry mirroring her own burgeoning life. She was to be Jacob's wife, a helpmate, a mother to his children. The roles felt immense, yet strangely comforting, like slipping into a garment perfectly tailored, if not chosen, for her. A week later, the wagon rumbled down the familiar track leading to Jacob's farm. The mingled scents of turned earth and fresh hay, testament to his diligent labor, perfumed the air. Levi guided the horse with practiced ease, while Rebecca's hand rested lightly on Sarah's arm. Sarah's heart quickened, a nervous flutter she sought to subdue. Jacob emerged from the barn, his sturdy frame silhouetted against the open doorway. He moved with unhurried grace, his strength evident in every stride. He greeted her parents with respectful nods and quiet words, his gaze briefly meeting Sarah's. His eyes, the deep color of rich soil, held a quiet intensity hinting at a calm, steady nature. They walked the farm's perimeter, Levi and Jacob discussing the imminent harvest, the welfare of the livestock. Sarah listened, observed. Jacob spoke sparingly, but his words, when offered, were thoughtful, grounded. He pointed out a recently mended fence, a thriving patch of corn, a quiet pride in his demeanor, a deep bond with the land he cultivated. Sarah envisioned herself here, perhaps tending a small kitchen garden, or watching children play in the sun-drenched yard. It was a good life, a righteous life, one blessed by God and affirmed by her community. Yet a faint question stirred within her, a subtle dissonance in the harmony of her acceptance. She quelled it, focusing instead on the sun's warmth on her face, the scent of hay, and the steady rhythm of Jacob's footsteps alongside her father's. The small gathering of village women felt like a gentle tide, drawing her deeper into her impending role. Their parlor was thick with the aroma of freshly baked bread and elderflower cordial. Soft, warm laughter filled the room as they shared anecdotes and offered counsel. A hand-stitched quilt, vibrant with autumn's colors, was presented to her, a collective gift from the community's women. Each meticulously sewn square represented a blessing, a prayer for her marriage. "A good wife is a blessing," Sister Mary, her voice raspy with age, offered, her eyes twinkling. "And a good husband, a gift from above." Sarah smiled, accepting their good wishes, their gentle guidance on household management, child-rearing, and honoring her husband. She felt a profound sense of belonging, a comfort in the shared traditions and unwavering faith that united them all. Later, as twilight deepened and the last woman departed, Sarah sat by the window, the quilt draped over her lap. Its warmth was a tangible embrace of the love and support surrounding her. The day's events replayed in her mind, the steady rhythm of the needle, Jacob's quiet strength, the comforting presence of the village women. Each moment was a distinct thread in the tapestry of her future, a future meticulously laid out, blessed, and accepted. Peace resided in that acceptance, a quiet strength born of duty and faith. Yet, as the moon cast long shadows across the fields, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her. It wasn't fear, not precisely, but a subtle shifting, like the earth settling after a long, quiet rain. She was walking a path chosen for her, a good path, a righteous path, but a small, secret part of her wondered if another path existed, one she had yet to even conceive. She folded the quilt carefully, tucking away not just the fabric, but also that fleeting, unsettling thought. The outsider's gaze. The morning sun, still low and hazy, cast long shadows across the dusty road as Sarah arranged her egg baskets. The air, crisp with the scent of dew and damp earth, carried the distant hum of early farm activity, a tractor rumbling in a far-off field, the bleating of sheep. Her stand, a simple wooden table draped with a checkered cloth, sat at the edge of their property, a familiar landmark for passing travelers. Most days, only the occasional delivery truck or a neighbor's buggy broke the monotony. It was a peaceful vigil, one she'd kept since she was a girl, and in its quiet rhythms, Sarah often found herself dreaming. Not of grand adventures or forbidden desires, but of small, subtle changes to the world she knew, perhaps a new variety of flower for her mother's garden, or a slightly different pattern for her next quilt. These were the boundaries of her imagination, carefully circumscribed by the expectations of her community, her family, and Jacob. A glint of chrome caught her eye down the road. It wasn't a buggy. It was a car, sleek and dark, moving with a speed that felt alien to their rural byway. It slowed, then, surprisingly, signaled, pulling off the main road and onto the gravel shoulder near her stand. Sarah's heart gave a little flutter, a nervous bird trapped in her ribs. It wasn't often an English car stopped, and when they did, the interactions were usually brief, transactional, often tinged with a polite but palpable distance. The engine purred to silence and the door opened. A man emerged, tall and lean, dressed in clothes that were unfamiliar yet seemed to fit him with an easy grace. He wasn't young, not like the boys in her village, but not old either, somewhere in the comfortable middle, with lines around his eyes that hinted at laughter, or perhaps a quiet intensity. His hair, a dark, rich brown, was a little longer than Jacob's, falling casually across his forehead. He offered a small, hesitant smile as he approached, his eyes, a clear, warm hazel, taking in her stand, then her. "Good morning," he said, his voice a low, pleasant baritone, that carried a hint of an unfamiliar accent, softer than the clipped tones of the city folk who sometimes passed through. "Are these your eggs?" Sarah nodded, her fingers unconsciously smoothing the folds of her apron. "Yes, sir. Fresh this morning." He stepped closer, his gaze lingering on the neatly arranged cartons. "They look it. What do you feed your hens? The yolks look particularly vibrant." Sarah blinked, surprised by his genuine interest. Most people just asked for the price. "Mostly corn and oats, and they have a good run of the pasture for the greens." He nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. "That explains it. The flavor must be exceptional." He picked up a carton, turning it over in his hands. "I'll take 2 dozen, please." As she calculated the price, her hands moved with practiced efficiency. He watched her, not with the hurried impatience she sometimes saw, but with a quiet attentiveness. When she presented the eggs, he handed her the exact amount in crisp bills. "Thank you very much. It's a beautiful morning for it, isn't it?" He gestured vaguely to the expansive landscape. "It is," Sarah agreed, meeting his gaze for a fleeting moment. There was something in his eyes, a calm curiosity that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't quite articulated before. Not just as the girl who sold eggs, or Jacob's intended, but as a person. He gave her another soft smile, a genuine curve of his lips that reached his eyes. "Have a good day." "You too, sir," she replied, her voice a little breathy. He turned, the 2 cartons cradled carefully in one arm, and walked back to his car. He placed them gently on the passenger seat before sliding behind the wheel. As he started the engine, he looked back at her, a quick, almost imperceptible nod before pulling away. The car accelerated smoothly, diminishing into a speck on the horizon, then vanishing entirely. Sarah stood there for a long moment, the scent of exhaust lingering faintly in the otherwise clean air. The spot where his car had been felt oddly empty. His questions about her hens, his calm demeanor, the genuine interest in his eyes, it all felt different. Not intrusive, not demanding, but simply present. He hadn't asked her name, nor offered his own. It had been a simple transaction, yet it left a warmth in her chest, a subtle shift in the quiet hum of her morning. She picked up the money he'd given her, smoothing the bills. They felt no different from any other money, but the exchange had been. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor of curiosity, new and strangely exhilarating, began to stir within her. The world, for a brief moment, had offered a glimpse of something beyond the familiar, and Sarah, for the first time, felt a flicker of desire to see more. The familiar rumble of a motor vehicle announced Daniel's return 2 days later. Sarah, sorting eggs into cartons, felt a strange flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the cool morning air. She watched him approach, a faint smile already gracing his lips. He wore a different shirt today, a muted green, but the same easy confidence. "Good morning, Sarah," he greeted, his voice a warm balm. "The eggs were excellent. My grandmother was particularly impressed." Sarah dipped her head slightly, a blush rising on her cheeks. "Thank you, Daniel. It's good to hear." He leaned against the weathered wooden counter, his gaze sweeping over the neat rows of cartons. "I was thinking, on my drive back to the city, your life here, it's so different from anything I've ever known." Sarah tightened her grip on an egg, careful not to crack the shell. "It is our way." "I understand that," Daniel said, his tone gentle, not dismissive. "But I grew up in a place where the nearest neighbor was a skyscraper away. Imagine, Sarah, buildings that touch the clouds, thousands of people all moving at once, a river of humanity flowing through concrete canyons." Sarah's mind struggled to conjure such an image. The tallest structure she knew was the silo on her father's farm. "Thousands?" she whispered, her eyes wide. "More than that. Millions. And lights. So many lights at night, it looks like spilled starlight on the earth. And music, from every window, every car, a symphony of different lives, all playing out at once." He spoke of cafes where people sat and read books, of museums filled with ancient treasures, of parks sprawling over acres, meticulously landscaped. He described vehicles that flew through the air and underwater cities. Sarah listened, captivated, her work forgotten. The world Daniel painted was a kaleidoscope of color and sound, a stark contrast to the quiet, orderly hues of her own existence. He spoke of a place called the ocean, a vast expanse of water so immense one could not see the other side. It stretches further than you can imagine, Sarah, blue as the deepest sky, teeming with creatures unlike anything you've ever seen. Whales, the size of a barn, singing songs that echo for miles. Sarah found herself leaning forward, her hands clasped on the counter. The image of a singing, barn-sized creature in an endless blue sea was both terrifying and breathtaking. Do you truly see such things?" Daniel chuckled softly. "I've seen the ocean, yes, and pictures of whales. The cities, too. I've walked through them countless times. It's all real, Sarah, just a different kind of real than what you know." He purchased a dozen eggs, but lingered, asking about her chickens, the best season for planting, genuinely interested in her answers. He didn't preach or condescend. He simply shared, like offering a glimpse through a window she hadn't known existed. When he finally left, the silence that settled around Sarah felt heavier than before. She finished her chores in a daze, her thoughts replaying Daniel's words. Buildings touching the clouds, millions of people, a sea without end. It was like hearing stories from a fantastical book, yet Daniel spoke of it with such casual certainty. Her life, once a comforting rhythm, now felt like a single note in a much grander, more complex melody. That evening, as she helped her mother prepare supper, Sarah found herself staring out the window at the familiar fields, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Before, this scene had always brought a deep sense of peace. Tonight, however, a subtle unease stirred within her. Was this all there was? The question, unheard, unspoken, resonated in the quiet corners of her mind. She pictured Daniel's river of humanity, and for the first time a flicker of longing, faint but undeniable, sparked within her. A longing for something she couldn't name, a world she'd only just begun to imagine. The clatter of the egg turner, a rhythmic counterpoint to the chirping crickets outside, filled the air as Sarah sorted the day's yield. Daniel had returned, just as he promised, his presence a vibrant splash of color against the muted backdrop of her familiar routine. He bought 2 dozen, carefully placing them in the wire basket he'd brought. His gaze, unhurried and curious, lingered on her as she worked. "Do you ever think about what you'd do, Sarah?" he asked, his voice a gentle murmur. "If you could do anything at all?" The question hung in the air, foreign and startling. No one had ever asked her such a thing. Her dreams, if she even dared to call them that, were simply the steady progression of her life. Marriage to Jacob, a home of her own, children, chickens, the rhythm of the seasons. There was no space for anything at all. A peculiar flutter stirred in her chest, a sensation akin to a bird trapped just beneath her ribs. I don't understand," she admitted, her fingers pausing on a pale brown egg. He smiled, a soft, understanding curve of his lips. "What makes your heart sing, Sarah? What makes you curious? What do you wish for, deep down, when no one is listening?" Her cheeks warmed. The notion of her heart singing was entirely new. She thought of the intricate patterns of sunlight through the willow branches by the creek, the quiet satisfaction of a perfectly baked loaf of bread, the way the mare's coat felt against her hand. But those were small, comforting pleasures, not grand aspirations. She searched for an answer, some hidden desire she hadn't known she possessed, but found only a vast, silent emptiness where such dreams might reside. "My life is here," she finally said, gesturing vaguely around the cool, quiet spring house. "My family is here. My path is clear." Daniel nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "And is that enough, Sarah? Truly?" The question pricked at a place she hadn't known was tender. Enough? It had always been enough. But now, after his tales of towering buildings that touched the clouds and oceans stretching further than her imagination could grasp, her familiar world felt smaller. The contentment she'd worn like a comfortable shawl now seemed to chafe. A new kind of longing, formless and unsettling, began to bloom within her. Later that evening, as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, Jacob arrived. He sat across from her on the porch swing, its gentle creak a familiar sound. His hair, a darker shade than Daniel's, was neatly cut, conforming to the community's standards. "The south field will be ready for planting soon," Jacob announced, his gaze fixed on the darkening fields. "We'll need to mend the fence by the creek, too. That old heifer found her way out again yesterday." Sarah listened, offering a murmur of agreement here and there. They discussed the price of feed, the health of a new calf, the need for a new roof on the barn. It was a comfortable, practical conversation, a tapestry woven from the threads of their shared life. There was no flutter in her chest, no sudden spark of curiosity. Her heart remained steady, predictable. Jacob spoke of their future, of the house they would build, the children they would raise, the life they would share. His words were a blueprint, clear and reassuring. Yet, as he spoke, an image flashed in her mind. Daniel's eyes, alight with curiosity, asking about her dreams. The contrast was stark, almost painful. Jacob offered certainty. Daniel offered possibility. When Jacob reached for her hand, his touch was warm and firm, a promise of stability. She did not pull away. She never would. But as she looked at his familiar face, she felt a profound disconnect. Her heart, so quiet and obedient during their conversation, had stirred and quickened just hours before for a man she barely knew. It was a secret, dangerous knowledge, and it settled in her like a heavy stone. The world she thought she knew, the contentment she thought she possessed, had begun to unravel, thread by quiet thread. And the unsettling truth was, she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to mend it. A stone and a secret. The late afternoon sun, already dipping towards the distant tree line, cast long, distorted shadows across the meadow as Daniel approached. He moved with an easy grace that was entirely foreign to the sturdy, earthbound gait of the Amish men she knew. Sarah watched him, a knot tightening in her stomach, a strange mix of apprehension and anticipation swirling within her. His presence, even from afar, felt like a tremor beneath the solid ground of her existence. When he reached her, the familiar scent of wood smoke and something sharper, like mountain air, clung to him. He offered a small, hesitant smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, which held a depth she found both compelling and unsettling. "Sarah," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the quiet air between them. "I have something for you." From his pocket he produced a small object, cupping it in his palm. It was a river stone, perfectly smooth and cool, a soft gray streaked with veins of almost invisible white. It felt ancient and full of untold stories under her fingertips as she took it. Its surface, worn by countless currents, felt like polished skin. "My grandmother gave me one when I was a boy," Daniel explained, his gaze fixed on the stone in her hand, then lifting to meet hers. "She said that a river stone, though shaped by the relentless flow of water, never loses its core. It's always itself, no matter the journey it takes. It reminded me of you." A blush crept up Sarah's neck, a warmth spreading through her veins that had nothing to do with the fading sun. The weight of the stone in her palm felt significant, a tangible anchor to Daniel and his words. His perception of her, as something strong and resilient beneath the surface, was a stark contrast to how she usually viewed herself, as a daughter, a sister, soon to be a wife, defined by her roles within the community. He saw a core, a self, that was uniquely hers, independent of expectation. She murmured a soft, "Thank you," the words feeling inadequate for the profound shift the simple gift had created within her. The stone was more than just a pebble. It was a silent promise, a symbol of a different way of seeing, of being. It was a secret, nestled now in the curve of her hand, soon to be hidden from the world. Later, back in the quiet sanctuary of her bedroom, Sarah clutched the stone. The rough wool of her apron, usually a comforting weight, now felt like a shroud. She glanced at the neatly folded quilt on her bed, a wedding gift from Aunt Martha, its bright patterns a stark reminder of the approaching day. Jacob, stability, familiarity, all of it felt suddenly foreign, seen through the lens of Daniel's words. With trembling fingers, she tucked the smooth stone deep into the pocket of her everyday dress, the one she wore for chores, for walking to the spring house. It was a safe place for now. It pressed against her hip, a constant, subtle presence, a secret warmth. A flicker of joy sparked within her, quickly followed by a cold wave of guilt. Jacob was a good man, steady and kind. He deserved a wife who was whole, whose heart wasn't secretly claimed by a smooth stone and the words of an outsider. The following days were a blur of activity, each task a hammer blow against her burgeoning doubts. The communal sewing bees, the endless baking, the chatter of excited women, it all pressed in on her. The scent of fresh bread and beeswax, usually comforting, now felt suffocating. Her mother, her face alight with proud anticipation, spoke of Jacob with increasing frequency, detailing their future home, the children they would raise. Each word, meant to reassure, only amplified Sarah's growing sense of entrapment. She found herself stealing glances at the river, its endless flow a stark contrast to the rigid path laid out before her. The stone in her pocket became her confidant, her silent rebellion. When she touched it, a quiet strength seemed to seep into her, a reminder of Daniel's unconventional truth. It was a dangerous comfort, one that threatened to unravel the carefully woven fabric of her life. The wedding preparations, once a source of gentle excitement, now felt like a tightening net, drawing her inexorably towards a future that was no longer entirely her own choosing. Each passing day, the stone grew heavier in her pocket, a constant reminder of the secret world that had begun to bloom within her, threatening to crack the placid surface of her obedience. A mother's gaze. The rich aroma of simmering tomatoes, usually a balm to Sarah's soul, hung heavy and suffocating this morning. Beside Rebecca at the well-worn kitchen table, her hands moved with automatic precision, peeling skins, but her thoughts churned with Daniel's recent words and the unsettling weight of the stone tucked into her apron. It wasn't merely a stone. It was a burgeoning secret, an invisible fissure widening in the familiar landscape of her life. Rebecca, her fingers a blur of motion, paused. Her gaze, warm and discerning, settled on Sarah. "You're quiet today, child. The quietest since you were knee-high and swallowed a button, convinced it would make you sing." A soft chuckle, usually a source of comfort, now carried a subtle, probing edge. Sarah forced a smile, a fragile facade that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just focused on the canning, ma'am. So many jars to fill." The lie tasted like dust, dry and unconvincing even to her own ears. Rebecca's eyes, the deep hue of rich earth, narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Aye, the canning, but your mind seems to wander further afield than the pantry shelves." She didn't press overtly, yet the gentle inquiry lingered, a silken thread tightening around Sarah's already frayed nerves. Her mother knew her, understood the subtle shifts in her daughter's rhythm, the new tension in her shoulders, the faint shadow in her usually tranquil gaze. Sarah bent closer to her task, letting her hair fall forward, a protective curtain against Rebecca's scrutiny. She couldn't articulate the turmoil within, not to her mother, not to anyone. How could she explain the sudden chasm that had opened, separating her from the Sarah of yesterday, the Sarah who had accepted her destiny without question? The image of Daniel, his earnest eyes, his unconventional perspective, was a spark threatening to ignite everything she had been taught to hold sacred. Later, as the afternoon sun splintered through the kitchen window, transforming dust motes into a golden dance, Jacob arrived. His dependable presence was heralded by the familiar clatter of his buggy, the rhythmic clip-clop of his horse's hooves after chores. Usually, a quiet ripple of anticipation would stir within Sarah, a sense of belonging, a comfortable fit within the community's tapestry. Today, it was replaced by a dull ache, a heavy premonition. He stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame, a hesitant smile gracing his lips. "Evening, Rebecca. Evening, Sarah." His voice was steady, kind, the voice of a man who promised provision, protection, and a good, honest life. Everything she had always believed she desired. "Jacob, come in, come in!" Rebecca bustled forward, a pleased smile blossoming on her face. "Sarah, fetch Jacob a glass of cold water." Sarah nodded, her movements stiff. As she poured the water, her back to Jacob, his presence felt solid and familiar, yet suddenly profoundly alien. The air between them, once comfortable, now thrummed with an unspoken tension, an awareness on her part that she desperately hoped he didn't perceive. When she turned and offered him the glass, their fingers brushed. A jolt, not of warmth or affection, but a raw surge of panic, shot through her. She quickly withdrew her hand, avoiding his gaze, fixing her eyes instead on the sturdy wooden table. "Are you well, Sarah?" Jacob asked, his brow furrowed in a slight frown. His concern was genuine, unfeigned. "Aye, Jacob, just tired from the heat." The lie felt even more transparent this time, fraying at the edges. She could feel Rebecca's eyes on them, a silent barometer of their interaction. Jacob didn't press. He was a man of few words, accustomed to the quiet rhythms of their life, to understanding unspoken cues. But the flicker of worry in his eyes remained. He took a long drink, the clinking of ice in the glass a stark counterpoint to the strained silence. Sarah yearned for him to leave, a wish that instantly filled her with profound guilt. Jacob was good. Jacob was steady. He was everything a wife could hope for in their community. And yet, the thought of his touch, his quiet affection, now felt like a cage tightening around her. The river stone in her apron pocket seemed to grow heavier, a constant, tangible reminder of the world beyond, a world that Daniel had, however unintentionally, unveiled to her. Her once placid contentment had been stirred into turbulent waters, and she no longer recognized the reflection she saw there. The internal pressure was almost unbearable, a silent scream against the expectations pressing in from every side. The invitation. The scent of damp earth and late spring blossoms usually brought Sarah a sense of peace, a familiar balm to her spirit. Today, it felt oppressive, heavy with the unspoken things that now resided within her. The small, smooth stone was a constant weight in her apron pocket, a physical manifestation of the secret world she now inhabited. Each time her fingers brushed against it, a jolt of both exhilaration and profound dread shot through her. The deception, a thin, brittle veil, stretched taut over her interactions with everyone, especially Mamma, whose sharp eyes seemed to pierce through her carefully constructed facade. Jacob, once a comforting presence, now felt like a cage, his dependable routines and easy smile a stark contrast to the tumultuous landscape of her mind. She found Daniel by the riverbank, exactly where he'd said he'd be. The sun, slanting through the willow branches, dappled his fair hair with gold. He was sketching, as always, his brow furrowed in concentration. Her approach, usually silent, felt clumsy, her boots crunching loudly on the gravel. He looked up, his eyes, the color of a summer sky, softening as they met hers. "Sarah," he said, his voice a low current beneath the murmur of the river. He closed his sketchbook, placing the pencil carefully beside it. There was a solemnity in his gaze that sent a shiver down her spine, a premonition of the words he was about to speak. She sat on a smooth, flat rock opposite him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The air between them, usually charged with quiet understanding, now hummed with an unfamiliar tension. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling slowly. "I have to leave, Sarah." The words hung in the air, sharp and sudden, like a snapped branch. Her heart gave a violent lurch, a painful throb against her ribs. She hadn't considered this. Not truly. He had always been here, a fixed point in her burgeoning internal world. "Leave?" she echoed, the single word feeling inadequate to the chasm it had just opened. "Yes, my work here is finished. I have other commitments." His gaze was unwavering, yet she detected a tremor in his voice, a vulnerability that surprised her. "I'm leaving at the end of next week." A cold dread seeped into her bones. The carefully guarded space she had created, the stolen moments, the whispered conversations, they would all vanish. The thought was unbearable, a return to the suffocating silence of her old life, amplified by the knowledge of what she was now losing. Then he reached out, his hand hovering uncertainly before gently covering hers. His touch was warm, a stark contrast to the chill that had settled over her. "Sarah," he began again, his voice lower now, almost raw. "These past weeks, they've changed me. You've changed me." His thumb stroked the back of her hand, a feather-light touch that sent tremors through her arm. "I've never met anyone like you. Your spirit, it's like a hidden spring, waiting to burst forth." Her breath hitched in her throat, her gaze locked with his, and in the depths of his blue eyes, she saw not just affection, but a deep, resonant understanding of the woman she was becoming, a woman only he seemed to truly see. "I know this is impossible, unthinkable, perhaps," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "But I can't leave without saying it. I can't leave without asking." He squeezed her hand, his eyes searching hers, imploring. "Come with me, Sarah. Come with me. See the world I've spoken of. Live a life beyond these fields, beyond the expectations laid out for you." The world spun. The gentle rush of the river became a roaring torrent in her ears. His words, a torrent of possibility and impossibility, crashed over her. Come with him? Leave everything? Her family, her community, Jacob, the life she had been meticulously prepared for since birth? The stone in her pocket suddenly felt searing hot, a burning ember of her rebellion. Her mind raced, a frantic kaleidoscope of images. Mama's heartbroken face, Jacob's bewildered disappointment, the stern condemnation of the bishop, the endless stretch of open road with Daniel beside her, the dazzling, terrifying unknown. The very air seemed to thicken, pressing in on her, stealing her breath. Her pulse hammered, a frantic drumbeat against the walls of her chest. This was it, the crossroads, the choice. One path led to comfortable familiarity, to duty and acceptance, albeit a hollowed-out version of herself. The other led to exhilaration, to a freedom she craved with an intensity that shocked her, but also to a precipice of unimaginable consequences. The weight of it was crushing, a physical burden that threatened to buckle her knees. She couldn't speak, couldn't even form a coherent thought, her breath catching in ragged gasps. The invitation, so desperately desired, was also a terrifying sentence. The wedding dress. The wedding dress hung suspended from a beam in the attic, a silent, pristine sentinel. Its smooth, cream-colored fabric, hand-stitched with such care, seemed to glow in the dim light filtering through the small, dusty window. Sarah traced the delicate lace trim with a trembling finger, the fabric cool and soft beneath her touch. Tomorrow she would don this dress, and with it, a life already meticulously planned, a future as unyielding as the sturdy oak floorboards beneath her feet. A knot tightened in her stomach, a cold, hard stone that had taken root the moment Daniel's words had hung in the air, audacious and breathtaking. Come with me. The memory of his eyes, so earnest, so full of a future that felt both terrifying and intoxicating, was a brand on her soul. This dress, so carefully crafted for her, now felt like a shroud. She imagined herself walking towards Jacob, his steady, familiar presence a comfort she had once cherished. He was kind, dependable, a good man who would provide for her, respect her, and father her children. Their life would be predictable, woven into the rich tapestry of their community, each day a repetition of the last, a gentle current carrying them forward. There would be no jarring surprises, no unsettling questions, no yearning for things beyond the horizon. It was a life of quiet peace, of belonging. But a new, insistent voice whispered in her mind, a counterpoint to the drone of duty. It spoke of sun-dappled paths through unknown woods, of words exchanged in hushed tones, of laughter that felt as free as the wind. It spoke of Daniel, of his belief in a Sarah she was only just beginning to discover. With him, the world stretched out, vast and uncharted, brimming with possibilities that thrilled her to her core, even as they made her stomach churn with fear. Could she truly walk away from everything she had ever known, everything she had been taught to value? Could she betray her family, her community, Jacob, for a love that had blossomed in secret, a love that felt as fragile as a butterfly's wing? The weight of the choice pressed down on her, a physical burden. She saw her mother's proud smile, her father's steady gaze, the expectations of generations etched into their faces. To shatter that would be an act of unimaginable cruelty. Yet, to step into that dress tomorrow, knowing her heart was already elsewhere, felt like a betrayal of a different kind, a betrayal of herself. She spent the night in a feverish toss and turn, the rough homespun sheets tangling around her legs. Her dreams were a kaleidoscope of conflicting images. In one, she stood by the river, the air crisp and clean, Daniel's hand reaching for hers, pulling her towards a vibrant, sunlit meadow filled with unknown wildflowers. His laughter rang out, light and free, and she felt a sense of exhilaration so profound it stole her breath. Then, the scene shifted. She was in the meeting house, the familiar wooden benches stretching into the distance, her community's faces a blur of solemn judgment. Jacob stood at the altar, his expression a mixture of hurt and confusion, his outstretched hand empty. Her mother's sobs echoed in the cavernous space, a sound that ripped through Sarah's chest. The wedding dress, which had felt so light and airy in her earlier dream, now seemed to drag her down, a heavy, suffocating weight. She tried to move, to run, but her feet were rooted to the spot, bound by invisible chains. The air grew thick, oppressive, pressing down on her until she could barely breathe. She woke with a gasp, the last tendrils of the nightmare clinging to her like cobwebs. The room was still cloaked in pre-dawn darkness, but a faint silver line was already appearing on the horizon. The silence of the house was profound, broken only by the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs. It was the eve of her wedding. The decision, long postponed, now demanded an answer. There was no more time for indecision. She had to choose. As the first birds began to chirp their morning song, Sarah slipped out of bed, her bare feet cold on the wooden floor. She walked to the window and pulled back the curtain, watching the world slowly awaken. The fields lay shrouded in mist, the outlines of the barns barely visible. A new day was dawning, bringing with it a choice that would forever alter the course of her life. The wedding dress still hung upstairs, waiting, and Sarah, poised on the precipice of two vastly different futures, knew only that she could not, would not, put it on unless her heart was truly in it. The question was, where was her heart leading her? A new path. The crisp morning air, usually a balm, felt like a tightening band around Sarah's chest as she stepped out of the house. The scent of freshly turned earth mingled with the fainter, sweeter smell of the bridal wreath pinned to her hair, its delicate white blossoms a stark contrast to the tumultuous landscape of her mind. Her mother adjusted the folds of her simple blue dress, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy and pride, oblivious to the tempest raging within her daughter. "Such a beautiful day for a wedding, my dear," her mother whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Jacob is a good man, a strong man. You will have a blessed life." Sarah offered a weak smile, a practiced movement that barely reached her eyes. Each step towards the meeting house felt like an irreversible commitment, each breath a silent negotiation with her own heart. The path, usually so familiar, stretched before her like an endless tunnel, its end shrouded in either comforting certainty or terrifying freedom. Along the way, faces beamed at her from porches and garden gates, her aunts, her cousins, the elders of the community. Their smiles were reflections of their own lives, their own choices, their own quiet contentment. They saw in her a continuation, a promise of stability and tradition. Sarah felt the weight of their expectations, a collective embrace that threatened to suffocate the fragile, nascent self she was just beginning to discover. Their pride was a warm blanket, but beneath it she shivered. Then she saw him. Jacob stood by the meeting house entrance, his dark suit crisp, his expression a mixture of earnestness and anticipation. He was everything her community valued, dependable, kind, solid. His gaze met hers, unwavering, full of the quiet affection that had always defined their interactions. A life with Jacob meant a life of peace, of shared harvest and familiar hymns, of children who would grow up knowing exactly who they were and where they belonged. It was a good life, a safe life. Her feet, which had been moving with a strange, dreamlike detachment, faltered. A single, sharp breath caught in her throat. The sounds of the community, the gentle lowing of a cow, the distant laughter of children, the rustle of leaves, faded into a dull hum. Everything sharpened, clarified, distilled into this singular moment. In her mind's eye, a different image superimposed itself over Jacob's earnest face. Daniel's vibrant smile, the way his eyes held a spark of wildness, the easy confidence of his posture. She remembered the thrilling rush of their conversations, the way he saw not just her role, but her, Sarah, with her own thoughts, her own desires, her own burgeoning sense of self. He had offered her not a path, but the courage to forge her own. He had offered the terrifying, exhilarating expanse of the unknown, the promise of a life lived on her own terms, a world beyond the fences of her community. The decision, when it came, wasn't a sudden revelation, but a quiet settling. It was the culmination of weeks of internal struggle, a deep, resonant knowing that emanated from the very core of her being. This wasn't about choosing between two men. It was about choosing between two versions of herself. One, molded by tradition and expectation, gentle and compliant. The other, an emergent spirit, hungry for discovery, for the vibrant tapestry of a world she had only glimpsed. She looked at her mother, whose eyes were now brimming with happy tears. She looked at Jacob, his face etched with hopeful anticipation. Then she looked at the meeting house, a symbol of everything she had ever known, and felt a profound, resolute strength bloom within her. Taking another deep, steadying breath, Sarah looked at Jacob, her gaze unwavering. "Jacob," she began, her voice surprisingly clear, though a tremor ran through her. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Around them, a hush descended, the cheerful murmurs of the community fading into an expectant silence. Jacob took a step towards her, his brow furrowing with concern. "Sarah, what is it?" I cannot," she said, the words a gentle but firm severance. Her voice, though soft, carried a weight of certainty that left no room for doubt. The color drained from Jacob's face, his hopeful expression replaced by one of stunned disbelief. A gasp rippled through the small crowd. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth. Sarah met Jacob's eyes, a profound sorrow mingling with the unwavering resolve she now felt. "My heart, it has found a different path." The aftermath was a blur of hushed whispers, shocked faces, and her mother's heartbroken cry. Sarah offered no further explanation, no defense. The truth, raw and undeniable, stood on its own. She turned, her back to the stunned community, and walked away from the meeting house, away from Jacob, away from the life she had been promised. Each step was an act of faith, a leap into the vast unknown, but with each step, a profound, liberating peace settled over her. The air, once tight, now felt expansive, invigorating. Years passed. Sarah learned to navigate a world far removed from the quiet lanes of her youth. She learned to read street signs, to exchange currency, to speak with a confidence that had once been unimaginable. She pursued the education she had always secretly craved, her mind alight with new ideas, new perspectives. She found work she loved, her days filled with purpose and the joy of continuous learning. Her connection with Daniel blossomed into a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared adventurous spirit. They explored national parks, hiked mountains, and visited bustling cities, each new experience a vibrant stroke on the canvas of her new life. There were challenges, of course, moments of doubt, pangs of longing for the familiar, the sting of being an outsider no matter where she went. But in those moments, she would recall the feeling of that wedding morning, the resolute peace that had settled in her heart, and she knew, with a certainty that resonated through her very bones, that she had chosen her own true north. She carried the echoes of her past, not as burdens, but as reminders of the strength she had found within herself. She sometimes saw an Amish buggy in the distance, or heard a snatch of a hymn, and a gentle ache would surface. But it was an ache tempered by gratitude, for the path she had left behind had ultimately led her to the path she was meant to walk, a path forged by her own will, illuminated by her own burgeoning light.